Imagine a land where emperors sought immortality, armies vanished without a trace, and a wall so vast it could be seen from space began to rise from the dust. This is not a myth. It is the birthplace of one of the world's greatest civilizations, ancient China. For thousands of years, its rulers guarded secrets of gunpowder, paper, and the compass, shaping the destiny of the entire world long before the West even knew it existed. But how did a land of warring tribes become the Middle Kingdom? What mysteries lie buried beneath its ancient palaces and tombs, treasures yet to be uncovered? Tonight, as you drift into sleep, you will travel through forgotten dynasties, witness the birth of an empire, and uncover the truths that shaped the soul of the East. The story of ancient China begins long before its great walls, mighty emperors, and sprawling cities. It starts in the fertile river valleys of the Yellow River, where early human communities learned to tame the waters, till the land, and form the first organized societies. These early Neolithic cultures, such as Yangshao and Longshan, laid the groundwork for what would become the earliest known Chinese civilization, the Xia dynasty. The Xia dynasty, though often wrapped in legend, represents the bridge between myth and history. Ancient texts such as the Records of the Grand Historian, by Sima Qian describe the Xia as the first dynasty to rule over a unified territory in the Yellow River Basin. While archaeological evidence is still debated, many historians connect the Xia with the Erlita culture, which flourished around 1900 to 1500 BC in the same region. Before the Xia, Chinese civilization was shaped by myths and legendary figures. The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, semi-divine rulers, were said to have taught humanity the essential skills of survival: agriculture, medicine, writing, and governance. Among them, the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, is remembered as a cultural hero who united tribes, invented tools, and introduced early forms of governance. His mythical battle against the warlord Qiyu is considered a founding tale of Chinese unity. The Xia's legendary founder, Yu the Great, is one of the most revered figures in Chinese history. According to ancient stories, he earned his place as ruler not through inheritance but through merit. China was suffering devastating floods that destroyed crops and displaced entire communities. Yu, with relentless determination, spent years controlling the waters, not by blocking rivers, but by channeling them into safe paths, creating canals, and improving irrigation. His success brought stability, allowed agriculture to flourish, and set the stage for a central authority. Under the Xia, early forms of Chinese governance began to emerge. Rulers organized territories, appointed local leaders, and developed primitive laws. Bronze tools and weapons started to appear, signaling a shift from Neolithic to early Bronze Age culture. Settlements expanded, and new methods of farming supported growing populations. The Xia dynasty is said to have lasted nearly 5 centuries, with a lineage of rulers that mixed historical figures with legendary traits. The capital cities, such as Jinchuan, were believed to be centers of political power and ritual life. Ceremonies to honor ancestors and nature spirits became central, laying the foundation for Chinese spiritual traditions. However, the Xia's history is shadowed by questions. Was it a true historical dynasty or a later invention to justify the rule of the succeeding Shang dynasty? Archaeological discoveries at Erlita suggest a complex society with palaces, bronze workshops, and early urban planning. Whether or not this was the Xia itself, it represents the dawn of organized Chinese civilization. By the end of the Xia era, power had become hereditary, and corruption reportedly grew among later kings. The last Xia ruler, Jie, is remembered as a tyrant whose cruelty and excesses led to rebellion. This paved the way for the rise of the Shang dynasty, which would bring clearer historical records, oracle bone writing, and a flourishing Bronze Age culture. The legacy of the Xia dynasty is not merely its political structure but its role in shaping Chinese identity. It stands at the threshold between legend and history, where mythological heroes gave way to rulers, and scattered tribes began to see themselves as part of a shared destiny. The rivers, the floods, and the struggle for order left an imprint on Chinese consciousness. The belief that harmony with nature, strong leadership, and ancestral reverence were the pillars of civilization. As we look back at the dawn of Chinese civilization, we see more than just the first dynasty. We witness the beginning of a worldview. The Xia story is a reflection of how ancient China remembered its origins, a blend of fact and fable, survival and ambition, order born from chaos. It is here, on the banks of the Yellow River, that the idea of China, Zhonghua, the Middle Kingdom, first took root. The Shang dynasty marks the point in Chinese history where legend begins to give way to documented history. While the Xia dynasty remains a blend of myth and emerging archaeology, the Shang is the first dynasty supported by written records, artifacts, and inscriptions that provide a clearer picture of life in early China. This dynasty flourished along the Yellow River, with its political and cultural center often associated with the region of modern-day Hunan province. The Shang era introduced organized statecraft, advanced bronze metallurgy, and one of the earliest forms of Chinese writing, laying down the foundation for what would become a continuous civilization. The rise of the Shang followed the decline of the Xia, according to traditional accounts. The last Xia ruler, Jie, was said to have been a tyrant, whose cruelty and indulgence weakened the state and stirred rebellion. Tang of Shang, the leader of the Shang tribe, defeated Jie and established a new dynasty around 1600 BC. Tang was regarded as a just and capable ruler who gained the support of surrounding tribes and began to consolidate power across the Yellow River Valley. His rule signaled a transition from a loose tribal confederation into a centralized monarchy. The Shang kings ruled through a system that combined political authority with religious legitimacy. The king was seen not only as a military leader but also as a high priest, serving as the intermediary between the people and their ancestors. Ancestor worship became a defining feature of Shang religion. It was believed that the spirits of deceased ancestors could influence the fortunes of the living from harvests to wars, and that the king, as the chief ritualist, could communicate with these spirits. Elaborate ceremonies, sacrifices, and offerings were performed to maintain this spiritual harmony. One of the most significant contributions of the Shang dynasty was the development of early Chinese writing. The earliest known Chinese script, found on oracle bones and bronze vessels, emerged during this period. Oracle bones were pieces of ox scapulae or turtle shells that were used for divination. Questions about warfare, agriculture, weather, or royal matters were carved onto the bones, which were then heated until they cracked. The pattern of cracks was interpreted by diviners, and the results were inscribed onto the bone, leaving behind a record. These inscriptions form the earliest known Chinese written language and provide historians with invaluable insights into Shang society, politics, and beliefs. Bronze technology reached an advanced level during the Shang dynasty. The Shang are renowned for their highly sophisticated bronze casting techniques, producing weapons, tools, ritual vessels, and ornaments of remarkable craftsmanship. Bronze ritual vessels, often decorated with intricate designs of animals and mythical creatures, were central to Shang religious life. These vessels were used in ceremonies to honor ancestors and deities, and they reflected the wealth and status of the elite. Agriculture formed the backbone of the Shang economy. Millet and wheat were staple crops, while rice cultivation spread in the southern regions. The Shang also domesticated animals including pigs, dogs, cattle, and horses. With growing agricultural surpluses, cities began to expand and trade networks developed, connecting various regions of early China. Jade, pottery, silk, and bronze objects became items of exchange and tribute. Shang society was hierarchical and stratified. At the top was the king, followed by a noble class of warriors, priests, and officials who administered territories and led armies. Beneath them were artisans and merchants, whose crafts and trade sustained the economy. Farmers made up the majority of the population, working the land to produce food for both the elite and themselves. At the bottom of the hierarchy were slaves and prisoners of war, often captured during Shang military campaigns. The Shang were also known for their achievements in art, music, and urban planning. Archaeological excavations at sites such as Yinshu, near modern-day Anyang, have revealed large palaces, tombs, workshops, and temples. The city of Yinshu is considered the last capital of the Shang dynasty and a major center of political and ritual activity. Within its ruins, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of oracle bones, bronze artifacts, jade carvings, and even evidence of early chariots and horses, indicating a complex and organized society. Religion and cosmology played a central role in Shang governance. The people believed in a supreme deity known as Shangdi, who was thought to control the forces of nature, weather, and fate. Shangdi was not worshipped directly by the common people but was addressed through the king and through ancestral spirits. This belief system reinforced the authority of the ruling elite, who claimed the ability to maintain harmony between heaven, earth, and the ancestors. Human sacrifice was also a part of Shang ritual practices. Archaeological findings show that prisoners of war, slaves, and even servants were sometimes sacrificed during royal burials or ceremonies to appease the spirits or ensure a smooth passage for the deceased into the afterlife. Large royal tombs contain not only precious artifacts but also the remains of sacrificial victims and animals, reflecting the Shang's view of the afterlife as a continuation of earthly status and needs. The military played a significant role in the expansion and defense of the Shang state. Shang armies were equipped with bronze weapons, chariots, and bows, giving them a technological edge over many neighboring tribes. Warfare was both a means of expansion and a source of captives used as labor or sacrifices. The Shang established a network of walled cities and strongholds to maintain control over their territories. As the dynasty progressed, its rulers faced the challenges of maintaining power over a vast and growing realm. Local lords and tribal leaders were granted authority to govern distant regions, but their loyalty was not always guaranteed. Over time, internal corruption, heavy taxation, and the burdens of war weakened the central authority. By the 11th century BC, the Shang faced growing pressure from neighboring tribes, particularly the Zhou. The last Shang king Dxan, often remembered as King Zhou of Shang, became infamous in Chinese tradition for his cruelty and decadence. Ancient texts describe his reign as one marked by excesses, lavish feasts, and disregard for the well-being of his people. His rule alienated allies and created unrest among the nobility. Around 1046 BC, the Zhou tribe, led by King Wu of Zhou, launched a decisive campaign against the Shang. At the Battle of Mai, the Shang forces were defeated, and the dynasty came to an end. The Zhou established a new dynasty, claiming that they had overthrown the corrupt Shang under the mandate of heaven, a concept that would become central to Chinese political philosophy. This idea held that heaven granted rulers the right to govern, but that this mandate could be withdrawn if a ruler became tyrannical or failed to uphold harmony. The Shang dynasty left behind a profound legacy. It was the cradle of Chinese writing, the refinement of bronze technology, and the establishment of religious and political systems that would shape later dynasties. The oracle bones provide a direct window into the thoughts, fears, and decisions of its rulers, making the Shang the first truly historical dynasty in China. Through their achievements in metallurgy, urban planning, and religious ritual, the Shang set the stage for a more organized and expansive Chinese civilization. Their rise and fall illustrate the early cycles of power, faith, and conflict that would repeat throughout Chinese history. While their world was still one of warriors and shamans, the Shang gave structure to the myths of the past and prepared the foundation for the philosophies, laws, and cultures that followed. The Zhou dynasty emerged from the west of the Shang heartland, a region known for its fertile plains and strategic valleys. Around 1046 BC, the Zhou leaders challenged the weakening Shang rulers, who had become infamous for their heavy taxation, oppressive rule, and extravagant court life. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Mai, where King Wu of Zhou led a coalition of discontented tribes and vassals against the last Shang king. The Shang army, though numerous, was plagued by low morale and many defected during the clash. This victory marked the end of the Shang dynasty and the birth of the Zhou dynasty, which would become one of the longest-lasting dynasties in Chinese history. After their victory, the Zhou rulers sought to legitimize their new reign. They introduced a powerful concept that would shape Chinese political thought for centuries: the mandate of heaven. This doctrine proclaimed that heaven, a divine cosmic order, granted rulers the right to govern. However, this mandate was conditional. If a ruler became despotic, neglected his duties, or failed to maintain harmony between heaven, earth, and the people, the mandate could be withdrawn. Natural disasters, rebellions, or social unrest were interpreted as signs that the mandate had been lost. This idea not only justified the Zhou conquest of the Shang but also established a recurring pattern in Chinese history: dynastic cycles rising and falling with the perceived favor of heaven. In the early Western Zhou period, the dynasty consolidated its rule through a decentralized, feudal system. King Wu and his successors granted lands to loyal relatives and allies, creating a network of regional lords who governed their own territories in exchange for military service and tribute to the Zhou king. This system allowed the Zhou to control a vast area without a large standing army. The capital was established at Haojing near modern Xi'an, strategically located near the Wei River, which provided fertile lands and easy access to trade routes. The Zhou kings maintained their authority through rituals, ancestor worship, and the promotion of Confucian-like moral codes, even before Confucius lived. They performed grand ceremonies to honor their ancestors and to maintain the balance between heaven and earth. Bronze casting reached new heights during this era, with elaborate ritual vessels decorated with intricate motifs of dragons, tigers, and mythical beings. These bronzes were not only functional but also symbolic, representing the divine approval of the ruling elite. Agriculture flourished under the Zhou, with advancements in iron tools emerging during the later stages of their rule. Early plowing techniques improved, irrigation systems expanded, and the introduction of crop rotation increased productivity. This agricultural growth supported population expansion and urban development. Small towns grew into bustling centers of trade, where merchants exchanged grains, silk, pottery, and bronze tools. Despite the strength of the Western Zhou period, the system carried inherent weaknesses. The feudal arrangement meant that over generations, regional lords gained power and autonomy, often passing their lands down hereditarily, making them semi-independent rulers. As communication across the vast territory was slow, and as the royal family's influence waned, these lords began to prioritize their own interests over loyalty to the Zhou king. A major turning point came in 771 BC, when the western Zhou capital was attacked by nomadic tribes allied with disgruntled vassals. The reigning king was killed, and the royal court was forced to flee eastward to the city of Luoyang. This event marked the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period. The move weakened the dynasty's central authority, as the eastern lands lacked the same strategic and economic strength as the western heartlands. The Eastern Zhou period is traditionally divided into two significant eras: the Spring and Autumn period 770 to 476 BC, and the Warring States period 475 to 221 BC. During the Spring and Autumn era, named after the historical chronicles Spring and Autumn Annals, hundreds of smaller states vied for influence, but the Zhou king still held a nominal position as the Son of Heaven. Regional lords, now known as dukes, marquises, and princes, began asserting their dominance, forging alliances, and engaging in frequent wars. Yet this was also a time of cultural flowering. Philosophers like Confucius and Laozi began their teachings, laying the foundations of Confucianism and Taoism. Confucius, born in 551 BC in the state of Lu, advocated for a return to moral order, filial piety, and the restoration of rituals that once defined the early Zhou. He saw the chaos of his era as a symptom of lost virtue among rulers and lords. Laozi, on the other hand, emphasized living in harmony with the Tao or the Way, promoting simplicity and withdrawal from the corrupting influences of politics. These philosophies would later shape Chinese civilization profoundly, becoming cornerstones of governance, ethics, and daily life. As the Spring and Autumn period waned, 7 major states emerged as dominant powers during the Warring States period: Qin, Chu, Zhao, Wei, Han, Yan, and Qi. These states engaged in intense warfare, employing new military strategies, crossbows, cavalry, and large infantry formations. Fortifications were built, including early forms of what would later become the Great Wall. Diplomacy, espionage, and political marriages were common tools for survival and expansion. During this time, the Zhou kings had become little more than figureheads. Their territory shrank to the region immediately surrounding Luoyang, and their decrees carried symbolic rather than practical weight. Yet, the idea of the mandate of heaven continued to justify the ambitions of the rising states. Each aspiring ruler claimed that the heavens favored their cause, using omens, rituals, and political propaganda to rally support. Economically, the Eastern Zhou era saw remarkable progress. Iron smelting became widespread, leading to stronger tools and weapons. The use of coinage facilitated trade, and markets flourished in growing urban centers. Roads and canals were built to link these cities, increasing communication and commerce between states. Artisans created lacquerware, jade carvings, and advanced pottery, while scholars compiled historical records, poetry, and strategic treatises like Sun Tzu's Art of War. The Zhou dynasty officially came to an end in 256 BC when the state of Qin annexed the remaining Zhou territory. This marked the conclusion of nearly 800 years of Zhou influence, both direct and nominal. Despite their decline, the Zhou left an enduring legacy. Their concept of the mandate of heaven became a cornerstone of Chinese imperial ideology, influencing the legitimacy of every subsequent dynasty. Their feudal model laid the groundwork for social and political structures, while their encouragement of philosophy, ritual, and cultural development nurtured a golden age of intellectual growth. In retrospect, the Zhou dynasty was less about centralization and more about cultural cohesion. Even as political power fractured, a shared sense of ritual, language evolution, and philosophical pursuit kept the Chinese world interconnected. The Zhou era represents the transition from a world of early Bronze Age states to one of sophisticated, competing kingdoms that would ultimately set the stage for China's first imperial unification under the Qin. Thus, the Zhou dynasty stands as a bridge between myth and empire, between bronze and iron, and between ritual kingship and bureaucratic states. Its rise and fall were marked not only by warfare and political intrigue but also by the birth of ideas that would define Chinese civilization for more than 2 millennia. In the late 3rd century BC, China was a land torn by war, ambition, and relentless change. The Warring States period had left the ancient Zhou world fragmented into rival kingdoms, each striving to dominate the others. Among them, the state of Qin, once regarded as a remote and semi-barbaric Western territory, began to rise with unprecedented speed. Harsh legalist policies, a disciplined army and ambitious rulers turned Qin from a frontier power into the dominant force in East Asia. By 221 BC, it had conquered the last of its rivals, bringing an end to centuries of disunity and founding the first unified empire in Chinese history. The architect of this transformation was Ing Zheng, who would proclaim himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin. His rise marked a turning point not only in Chinese politics but also in the way authority, culture, and law were imagined. The Qin dynasty, though short-lived, laid the foundation for Imperial China for the next 2 millennia. The Qin were originally seen as outsiders by the Central States. Located in the rugged lands of modern-day Shaanxi and Gansu, they had developed strong cavalry traditions, close ties to nomadic tribes, and a hardened military culture. Earlier Zhou rulers had entrusted them with guarding the western borders. Over time, Qin absorbed agricultural reforms and adopted the legalist philosophy, a strict system that emphasized laws, punishments, and centralized authority over traditional aristocratic privilege. This system, championed by thinkers like Shang Yang, transformed Qin society into a militarized, efficient machine. By the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, Qin's rulers, especially King Zhaoxiang and King Zheng, later Qin Shi Huang, launched relentless campaigns against their neighbors. Their armies used advanced weapons of iron, crossbows, and disciplined formations. The famous general Bai Qi became a symbol of Qin's ruthlessness, orchestrating massive battles such as the one at Changping, where hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers were reportedly buried alive. After decades of war, Qin eliminated the remaining 6 states, Han, Zhao, Wei, Chu, Yan, and Qi, one by one. In 221 BC, Ing Zheng declared the unification of all under heaven. Rejecting the old title of king, he created a new one, Huangdi, meaning emperor, a divine ruler beyond mortal kingship. Thus began the Qin dynasty. Once in power, Qin Shi Huang and his chief minister Li Si undertook sweeping reforms to cement their rule. China, once divided by dialects, weights, currencies, and written scripts, was standardized. The Qin introduced a unified system of writing, so that scholars from distant provinces could read the same characters. They established standard weights and measures, unified the currency into round coins with square holes, and constructed a vast network of roads and canals to connect the empire. The Qin also imposed a strict centralized bureaucracy. Feudal lords were stripped of their lands, which were divided into commanderies directly governed by imperial officials. This broke the power of hereditary aristocracies and ensured loyalty to the throne. Heavy taxes and forced labor, however, became hallmarks of this system, placing immense burdens on peasants. One of the most ambitious projects was the linking and expansion of frontier walls, creating the early foundation of what would later become known as the Great Wall of China. Built to defend against northern nomads such as the Xiongnu, this massive endeavor required hundreds of thousands of laborers, many of whom perished under harsh conditions. Qin Shi Huang was obsessed with immortality and the afterlife. He sent expeditions in search of the elixir of life, consulted alchemists, and constructed one of the most extravagant tombs in human history, the mausoleum at Lishan, guarded by the world-famous terracotta army. Discovered in 1974 near Xi'an, this vast underground complex contained thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots, each with unique features, meant to accompany the emperor into eternity. Despite its achievements, the Qin dynasty was marked by fear, oppression, and relentless control. Books that contradicted official ideology were burned in the infamous book burning of 213 BC, and scholars were executed or exiled. The harsh legalist code imposed collective punishments, and massive labor conscription led to widespread resentment among the populace. In 210 BC, Qin Shi Huang died during a tour of the empire. His sudden death set off a power struggle in the court. His successor, Qin Shi, was weak and manipulated by corrupt eunuchs and ministers. Rebellions erupted across the empire, led by peasants, former nobles, and soldiers weary of forced labor. The most famous of these uprisings was led by Qin Sheng and Wu Guang, whose call to arms sparked a wave of resistance. By 206 BC, less than 2 decades after its founding, the Qin dynasty collapsed. The rebel leader Liu Bang, a former peasant and soldier, emerged victorious in the ensuing chaos, establishing the Han dynasty, which would inherit many of Qin's reforms but temper them with a more Confucian approach. Although brief, the Qin dynasty left an indelible mark on Chinese civilization. It created the very idea of a unified China, established the blueprint for centralized imperial rule, and began monumental works that shaped history. Its legacy is a paradox, remembered both for its cruelty and its vision, for the suffering it caused and the foundations it laid. Today the name China itself derives from Qin. The terracotta army continues to astonish the world as a testament to its ambition. And the concept of one nation under a single emperor, forged in the fires of conquest and discipline, would echo for centuries to come. The fall of the Qin dynasty in 206 BC left China in turmoil, with rival warlords and insurgent forces battling for control over the vast empire that Qin Shi Huang had so briefly unified. Out of this chaos emerged a man of humble origins, Liu Bang, a former peasant and low-ranking soldier, who would rise to become Emperor Gaozu, the founder of the Han dynasty. His victory over his rival Xiang Yu at the Battle of Gaixia in 202 BC marked the dawn of a new era, one that would last over 4 centuries and become known as one of the greatest golden ages in Chinese history. The Han dynasty, divided into the Western Han, 206 BC, 9 AD, and Eastern Han, 25 to 220 AD, periods, built upon the foundations of the Qin but transformed them with a more moderate and enduring vision. While the Qin had ruled through fear and rigid legalism, the Han blended that strictness with Confucian ideals, emphasizing morality, filial piety, and the role of scholars in governance. This balance of centralized power and humane governance allowed the Han to create a lasting empire that shaped Chinese culture, politics, and identity for millennia. Restoring order and governance. Under Emperor Gaozu, the Han reinstated many of the Qin's administrative systems, such as standardized laws, coinage, and measurements, but eased the harsh punishments and reduced forced labor. Land was redistributed, taxes were lowered, and feudal kingships were gradually replaced by imperial commanderies loyal to the central court. Over time, the bureaucracy became staffed with educated officials selected through examinations based on Confucian classics, the seeds of China's famous civil service system. The Han court became a center of intellectual and cultural activity. Confucianism, once suppressed by the Qin, was elevated to the status of state ideology under Emperor Wu, r. 141 to 87 BC. Schools and academies flourished, producing scholars who recorded history, studied philosophy, and codified ethics. One of the most influential works of this time was Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, which provided a comprehensive history of China from its mythical origins to the Han. Expansion and the Silk Road. The Han era was marked by both consolidation and expansion. Through diplomacy and conquest, the Han extended their control far beyond the Yellow River Basin. Under Emperor Wu, China expanded into Korea, Vietnam, and Central Asia, securing trade routes that would later be known as the Silk Road. This vast network connected China with Persia, India, and even the Mediterranean world, enabling the exchange of silk, spices, glassware, and ideas. The Silk Road not only brought wealth but also introduced new technologies, religious beliefs, and cultural exchanges. It was during the Han period that Buddhism first entered China, carried by merchants and monks traveling from India. This would later become one of the most profound spiritual transformations in East Asia. Economy, science, and daily life. The Han dynasty oversaw remarkable advances in agriculture, technology, and industry. The invention of paper by Cai Luan, c. 105 AD, revolutionized record-keeping and literature. Iron tools became widespread, improving farming productivity, while large-scale irrigation projects expanded arable land. Salt and iron monopolies were controlled by the state, providing revenue for military campaigns and infrastructure. Everyday life in Han China was a blend of rural traditions and urban sophistication. Most people were farmers living in thatched homes, cultivating millet, rice, and wheat. Markets thrived in growing cities like Chang'an and Luoyang, where merchants traded goods from across Asia. Han society was hierarchical, with the emperor at the top, followed by nobles, officials, peasants, artisans, and merchants. Slavery existed but was not as widespread as in some other ancient empires. The Han also made advances in astronomy, medicine, and seismology. They developed the first known seismograph, refined calendars, and wrote medical texts that influenced East Asian healing traditions for centuries. Art and literature flourished. Bronze sculptures, lacquerware, and silk paintings depicted both courtly life and the natural world. Challenges and decline. Despite its brilliance, the Han dynasty was not without challenges. Corruption in the court, the rise of powerful eunuchs, and factional struggles often weakened central authority. Heavy taxation and land concentration in the hands of wealthy elites caused hardship for peasants, leading to frequent uprisings. One of the most significant rebellions was the Yellow Turban Rebellion, 184 to 205 AD, a massive peasant revolt inspired by Taoist millenarian beliefs. Though suppressed, it severely weakened the Eastern Han. Meanwhile, nomadic incursions from the Xiongnu and other northern tribes drained resources and forced costly military campaigns. By the late 2nd century AD, the empire fractured into competing warlord territories. In 220 AD, the last Han emperor abdicated, marking the end of the dynasty and the beginning of the Three Kingdoms period, an era of division and legendary warfare. Legacy of the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty left an enduring legacy that shaped the identity of China for centuries. Even today, the majority ethnic group in China calls itself the Han people, and the Chinese script, culture, and bureaucratic traditions all trace their roots to this era. The Confucian values of family loyalty, moral governance, and respect for learning became embedded in East Asian civilizations. The achievements of the Han, from the opening of the Silk Road to the invention of paper, from the codification of history to the flourishing of science, earned it a place as one of the great golden ages of the ancient world. It was an era of both consolidation and creativity, of empire building and cultural refinement, laying the groundwork for China's future as a powerful and enduring civilization. The fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 AD did not bring peace to China. Instead, it marked the beginning of one of the most legendary and tumultuous periods in Chinese history, the Three Kingdoms era. This was a time of warlords, shifting alliances, and heroic struggles, later immortalized in literature, drama, and folklore. Though it lasted only 60 years, its impact on Chinese culture and historical imagination has endured for centuries. The collapse of the Han and the rise of warlords. As the Eastern Han Dynasty weakened, powerful regional warlords gained control over large territories. Corruption, peasant uprisings like the Yellow Turban Rebellion, and repeated invasions by nomadic groups created a vacuum of power. Among the most prominent figures were Cao Cao, a cunning and ruthless strategist in the north, Liu Bei, a distant relative of the Han imperial family who portrayed himself as a champion of virtue, and Sun Quan, who controlled the fertile lands of the south along the Yangtze River. When the last Han emperor, Emperor Xian, was forced to abdicate in 220 AD, Qiao Pai, the son of Cao Cao, declared the establishment of the Wei dynasty in the north. In response, Liu Bei founded the Shu Han kingdom in the southwest, claiming to continue the Han legacy, while Sun Quan declared himself emperor of eastern Wu in the south. Thus, China was divided into three rival states, Wei, Shu, and Wu. Battles and strategies. The Three Kingdoms period is famed for its dramatic battles and legendary strategies. One of the most iconic events was the Battle of Red Cliffs, 208 to 209 AD, fought on the Yangtze River. Here, the allied forces of Liu Bei and Sun Quan, with the brilliant strategist Zhuge Liang, defeated the much larger forces of Cao Cao using fire ships and clever deception. This victory preserved the independence of Shu and Wu and marked a turning point in the balance of power. The era also saw the rise of legendary generals and tacticians. Zhao Yun, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, Zhou Yu, and Sima Yi, whose exploits became the basis for one of China's greatest historical novels, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. They were remembered not only for their battlefield skills but for their loyalty, cunning, and sometimes tragic fates. Governance and life amid chaos. While warfare dominated the period, each kingdom attempted to govern its territory and stabilize its economy. In Wei, Qiao Pai and his successors established a strong central administration and promoted agricultural reforms. In Shu, Liu Bei and Zhuge Liang focused on restoring the Han legacy, encouraging Confucian ideals and rebuilding war-torn lands. In Wu, Sun Quan developed trade along the Yangtze and maintained a powerful navy. Life for ordinary people, however, was harsh. Constant warfare meant heavy taxation, forced conscription, and displacement. Villages were burned, farmlands abandoned, and populations migrated to avoid conflict. Yet, amidst the destruction, advances continued in military technology, including improved crossbows and naval tactics. The fall of the Three Kingdoms. By the mid-3rd century, the balance of power began to shift. The Wei state, the strongest of the three, gradually consolidated control. The ambitious general Sima Yi and his descendants took control of Wei's court, laying the groundwork for a new dynasty. Shu Han, weakened by repeated campaigns against Wei, fell in 263 AD. Eastern Wu lingered a little longer but was finally conquered in 280 AD by the Western Jin dynasty, founded by the Sima family. The reunification under Jin brought an end to the Three Kingdoms era, but it was short-lived as China would again fragment in the centuries to come. Legacy of the Three Kingdoms. Despite its chaos, the Three Kingdoms period left a profound mark on Chinese history and culture. It became a symbol of heroism, loyalty, and the tragic cost of ambition. The stories of this era, preserved in historical records and romanticized in the romance of the Three Kingdoms, shaped Chinese literature, theater, and even modern media, from operas to video games. The concept of shifting alliances, cunning strategies, and the rise and fall of great heroes continues to fascinate generations. Figures like Zhuge Liang, renowned for his wisdom and foresight, and Guan Yu, revered as a deity of loyalty and righteousness, became cultural icons. In many ways, the Three Kingdoms reflected the enduring cycle of Chinese history: unity followed by fragmentation, and the dream of empire surviving even through decades of division. It was a period where power was contested by both the sword and the mind, where fate turned on clever plans, and where the echoes of war shaped the foundation for future dynasties. The fall of the Han dynasty had left China fractured and weary. After decades of chaos during the Three Kingdoms period, a new dynasty arose that promised to reunify the realm, the Jin dynasty. Yet the promise of unity would soon unravel, leading China into centuries of division, warlordism, and foreign invasions. This chapter explores how the Jin dynasty rose from the ashes of the Han, how internal strife and external pressures tore it apart, and how this turbulent era shaped the soul of China for generations. The rise of the Jin dynasty. The Jin dynasty was founded in 265 AD by Sima Yan, known as Emperor Wu of Jin. He was a member of the powerful Sima clan, which had gradually gained control over the kingdom of Wei during the later years of the Three Kingdoms period. Sima Yan usurped the throne from the Chao family, who had ruled Wei, and proclaimed the start of the Jin dynasty. His ambition was clear: to reunite China under one central rule. In 280 AD, the Jin achieved a major triumph by conquering the kingdom of Wu, the last remaining rival from the Three Kingdoms era. For the first time in nearly a century, the Chinese empire was once again unified. This moment of victory brought optimism and a sense of renewal. The Jin court, based in Luoyang, implemented policies aimed at restoring stability, rebuilding infrastructure, reviving Confucian learning, and rewarding loyal families with titles and lands. Challenges of unity. However, this unity was fragile. The Jin dynasty inherited deep social, economic, and political problems from the preceding era. Powerful aristocratic families controlled vast estates, while common farmers bore heavy taxes and labor burdens. Many soldiers who had fought in the wars of unification were restless, and regional commanders held more loyalty to their own families and clans than to the central government. A major structural weakness lay in the policy of granting imperial princes semi-autonomous territories. These princes, often brothers or relatives of the emperor, were given their own military forces and administrative powers. Instead of strengthening the empire, this arrangement created rival power centers that would soon clash. The War of the Eight Princes. The first great disaster of the Jin dynasty was the infamous War of the Eight Princes, 291 to 306 AD. After Emperor Wu's death, his successor, Emperor Hui of Jin, proved weak and incapable of ruling effectively. A series of power struggles erupted among 8 imperial princes, each vying for control over the court and the regency. This internal conflict devastated northern China. Armies marched back and forth, pillaging cities, burning farmlands, and displacing millions. Civilian suffering reached horrific levels. Famine, disease, and mass migrations became widespread. The central government lost its ability to govern effectively, and the empire's unity began to collapse. Invasions from the north. The rise of the Five Barbarians. While the Jin princes fought each other, external threats grew stronger. Nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples living along China's northern frontier, collectively known as the Five Barbarians, Xiongnu, Jie, Xianbei, Di, and Chang, began to raid and invade weakened Chinese territories. Many of these groups had already been integrated as mercenaries or settlers within the empire, but during the chaos, they seized the opportunity to establish their own kingdoms. In 311 AD, the Xiongnu forces captured the capital Luoyang, and in 316 AD, they seized Chang'an, effectively toppling the Western Jin dynasty. The imperial court fled south, crossing the Yangtze River, where they established the Eastern Jin dynasty with its capital at Jiankang, modern Nanjing. Northern China, meanwhile, fragmented into a patchwork of rival states ruled by non-Han leaders, marking the beginning of the era known as the 16 Kingdoms. The Eastern Jin and Southern survival. The Eastern Jin dynasty, 317 to 420 AD, ruled only the southern half of China but managed to preserve Chinese culture, Confucian traditions, and remnants of imperial authority. The Yangtze River became the natural boundary between the barbarian-ruled north and the Han-ruled south. This period saw remarkable migrations of northern Chinese elites to the south, bringing with them knowledge, traditions, and administrative skills. The south flourished economically through rice cultivation, trade, and maritime connections with Southeast Asia. However, the eastern Jin was also plagued by internal strife, warlord rebellions, and powerful aristocratic clans who often held more power than the emperors they served. Culture amid chaos. Despite the political instability, the Age of Division was a time of rich cultural and intellectual development. Taoism gained prominence as people sought spiritual refuge from worldly turmoil, while Buddhism spread widely, offering hope of salvation and new philosophical perspectives. Monasteries became centers of learning, art, and community life. Poetry and calligraphy flourished as refined arts, with figures like Wang Shiji becoming legendary for their mastery. Northern regimes, though often seen as foreign, also contributed to the cultural blending of the era. They adopted many aspects of Chinese governance, language, and traditions while introducing their own customs and military techniques. This fusion laid the groundwork for later dynasties that would eventually reunify China. The Northern and Southern dynasties. After the fall of the Eastern Jin, China entered the era of the Northern and Southern dynasties, 420 to 589 AD. In the north, successive dynasties, often founded by non-Han peoples such as the Xianbei, competed for dominance, while in the south, Chinese-led dynasties continued the Eastern Jin legacy. This prolonged division shaped China's geography, economy, and identity. The south became a hub of trade, agriculture, and cultural refinement, while the north, though scarred by war, became a frontier of military innovation and ethnic integration. Over time, many of the northern ruling elites became Sinicized, adopting Chinese names, customs, and Confucian ideals. Towards reunification. The Age of Division finally drew to a close with the rise of the Sui dynasty in 589 AD, which reunified China after nearly 3 centuries of fragmentation. But the lessons of the Jin dynasty in this era were profound. They revealed the dangers of internal power struggles, the vulnerability of empires to external pressures when unity is lost, and the resilience of Chinese culture in times of disunity. Legacy of the Jin dynasty and the Age of Division. The Jin dynasty's failure to maintain long-term unity is often seen as a cautionary tale in Chinese history. Yet its legacy is not solely one of failure. It preserved the dream of a unified empire, maintained a bridge between the classical age of the Han and the future dynasties to come, and allowed for the migration and development of southern China, which would later become a powerhouse of Chinese civilization. The Age of Division also shaped China's philosophical and religious landscape, spreading Buddhism and invigorating Taoism. It demonstrated how even in chaos, art, literature, and intellectual life can thrive. And it set the stage for a new cycle of unity and prosperity that would emerge under the Sui and Tang dynasties. After centuries of division, chaos, and shifting dynasties, the land of China longed for unity. The fall of the Western Jin had left the north under the sway of nomadic states while the south was ruled by a series of short-lived dynasties. Trade had slowed, farmlands were neglected, and the once great administrative systems of the Han were fragmented. In this landscape of disunity, a new force began to rise, the Sui dynasty. The story of the Sui begins with Yang Jian, later known as Emperor Yuan of Sui. Born into a noble family during the Northern Zhou, Yang Jian was both a skilled military leader and an astute politician. Through marriage alliances and decisive action, he maneuvered himself into power, seizing control of the Northern Zhou throne in 581 AD. Declaring the foundation of the Sui dynasty, he embarked on a mission to reunify the fractured Chinese empire. The first great achievement of the Sui was the conquest of the Qin dynasty in the south. In 589 AD, Sui armies crossed the Yangtze River, and after a swift campaign, they brought an end to centuries of division between north and south. For the first time in nearly 300 years, China stood united under a single ruler. With reunification came the challenge of rebuilding a nation worn down by war and neglect. Emperor Yuan implemented sweeping reforms aimed at restoring prosperity and centralizing authority. Land distribution was reorganized under the equal field system, ensuring that farmers received land to till in exchange for taxes and labor service. The government revived the examination system for selecting officials, laying the foundation for a more merit-based bureaucracy. Taxation was standardized, and the legal code was revised to provide uniformity across the empire. One of the Sui's most ambitious projects was the construction of the Grand Canal. Stretching over 1,700 kilometers, This monumental engineering feat linked the fertile south with the political centers of the north, allowing grain, troops, and trade goods to move efficiently across the empire. The canal not only strengthened the economy but also became a lifeline for the capital, feeding its growing population. Culturally, the Sui sought to restore Confucian order while also embracing Buddhism, which had grown increasingly popular during the Age of Division. Emperor Wen and his successor, Emperor Yang, sponsored the building of temples and the translation of Buddhist texts, integrating religious life with the state's vision of harmony. However, the very ambitions that brought the Sui to greatness also sowed the seeds of its downfall. The massive construction projects, including the rebuilding of the Great Wall and the expansion of the Grand Canal, placed enormous strain on the peasantry. Heavy taxes, forced labor, and military campaigns, particularly the disastrous invasions of Goguryeo in Korea, led to widespread unrest. Emperor Wen, known for his frugality and discipline, was succeeded by his son, Emperor Yang, in 604 AD. Emperor Yang was a more extravagant and ambitious ruler. He moved the capital to Luoyang and continued his father's projects with even greater zeal, but his heavy-handed policies alienated both the common people and the elite. Rebellions broke out across the empire, and regional warlords began to defy the central government. By 618 AD, the Sui dynasty collapsed under the weight of its ambitions. Emperor Yang was assassinated during a coup, and the empire splintered once more. Yet, despite its brief existence, the Sui left a profound legacy. Its unification of China paved the way for the glorious Tang dynasty that followed. The Grand Canal remained a vital artery of commerce for centuries, and its administrative reforms endured long after the dynasty itself was gone. The Sui dynasty is remembered as both a time of renewal and overreach, a dynasty that, in less than 4 decades, managed to reunify a fractured land, rebuild its economy, and set the stage for a golden age, but also one that exhausted its people and fell victim to its own grand designs. Its story is a testament to the fine line between ambition and ruin in the tides of history. The fall of the Sui dynasty left China fractured once more, but from its ruins rose one of the greatest dynasties in Chinese history, the Tang. Founded by Li Yuan, later Emperor Gaozu, the Tang dynasty emerged in 618 AD and would endure for nearly 3 centuries, becoming a symbol of imperial grandeur, cultural brilliance, and international influence. The Tang era began with consolidation. Li Yuan, a former Sui general, seized the moment of chaos and rallied his forces to establish control over the heartland. With the support of his capable son, Li Shimin, later Emperor Taizong, the dynasty crushed rival warlords and reunified the empire. Emperor Taizong ascended the throne in 626 AD after the famous Xuanwu Gate incident, where he eliminated his political rivals, including his brothers, to secure his rule. Under Emperor Taizong, the Tang dynasty embarked on reforms that would shape the empire's golden age. The equal field system ensured fairer land distribution, while the imperial examination system was refined, allowing talented scholars from diverse backgrounds to rise in the bureaucracy. Taxes were moderated to encourage agriculture, and military campaigns secured China's frontiers, extending influence into Central Asia and beyond. The Tang capital, Chang'an, modern Xi'an, became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Its wide streets were lined with markets, temples, and foreign embassies. Merchants from Persia, India, Arabia, and Central Asia flocked to the city, bringing with them silk, spices, jewels, and ideas. The Silk Road flourished as never before, linking east and west in an unprecedented network of trade and culture. Culturally, the Tang dynasty marked a high point of Chinese civilization. Poetry thrived, with masters like Li Bai and Du Fu immortalizing the landscapes, politics, and emotions of their time. Calligraphy and painting reached new heights, while Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism coexisted, influencing art, philosophy, and governance. Buddhist monasteries became centers of learning, while Taoist rituals and Confucian ethics guided the court. The Tang military also excelled. Under generals like Gao Xianzhi and the famous An Lushan before his rebellion, the empire's armies campaigned deep into Central Asia, securing borders and establishing protectorates. Naval expeditions expanded Chinese presence in Southeast Asia, laying the groundwork for future maritime trade. However, no golden age is without its shadows. The mid-Tang period faced its greatest crisis with the An Lushan rebellion, 755 to 763 AD. Initially a trusted general, An Lushan turned against the Tang court, leading a massive uprising that devastated northern China. Cities were sacked, millions perished, and the empire never fully recovered its former glory. Although the rebellion was eventually quelled, it marked the beginning of decline. Subsequent emperors struggled to reassert central authority. Powerful warlords, known as Jidushi, gained increasing autonomy in the provinces, while court eunuchs interfered in politics, often manipulating imperial succession. The once mighty bureaucracy became riddled with corruption, and the economy faltered as regional taxation replaced the imperial system. Despite these challenges, the Tang dynasty endured for over a century after the Inlushan rebellion. The later Tang period saw a revival of art and trade, and the dynasty continued to project cultural influence far beyond its borders. Japan, Korea, and Vietnam adopted Tang laws, architecture, and literary styles, creating a cultural sphere that shaped East Asia for generations. By the early 10th century, however, the dynasty was a shadow of its former self. Peasant uprisings, warlord rivalries, and foreign invasions eroded its power. In 907 AD, the Tang dynasty formally collapsed, giving way to the fragmented Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms period. Yet, the legacy of the Tang dynasty is unparalleled. It is remembered as the age when China was at the center of the world, prosperous, open, and creative. Its poetry still echoes, its capital's ruins still speak of a time when merchants from across Eurasia mingled under Chinese skies, and its systems of governance influenced dynasties for centuries to come. The Tang was not just a dynasty, it was the cultural and political heart of a continent, and its story remains a testament to the heights Imperial China could achieve. The collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907 AD marked the end of one of the most glorious eras in Chinese history. In its wake, China entered a period of political disunity known as the Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms period. It was a time of shifting allegiances, regional warlords, and competing dynasties that ruled for brief spans before falling to rivals. Though this era lasted less than a century, it shaped the path for the rise of the Song dynasty and left a lasting imprint on the cultural and political landscape of China. The Five Dynasties in the North. The northern heartland of China became the seat of successive short-lived dynasties, collectively known as the Five Dynasties. These were later Liang 907 to 923 AD. Founded by Yuan, a former Tang general turned warlord, the later Liang established its capital at Kaifeng. It ruled with harsh methods, heavy taxes, and suspicion toward former Tang loyalists. Yuan's reign was marked by brutality, including the massacre of Tang royal descendants. Later Tang 923 to 936 AD. Established by Li Kongsu, the later Tang overthrew the later Liang with the help of Shadua Turkic allies. They attempted to restore some Tang traditions but struggled with internal strife and dependence on non-Han military forces. Later Jin 936 to 947 AD. Founded by Shi Jingtang, this dynasty relied heavily on the Khitan Liao Empire to gain power, ceding the 16 prefectures to them as a price for their support, a decision that would haunt Chinese geopolitics for generations. Later Han 947 to 950 AD. A short-lived regime established by Lu Ziyuan, which fell quickly due to corruption and lack of support. Later Zhou 951 to 960 AD. The most stable and reform-oriented of the Five Dynasties, later Zhou began centralizing reforms and military strengthening under Emperor Shizong, laying groundwork for reunification. The Ten Kingdoms in the South. While the North experienced frequent dynastic changes, the South saw the rise of relatively stable regional kingdoms. These were collectively called the Ten Kingdoms, though more than 10 states existed at times. Key examples include Wu 902 to 937 AD, and Southern Tang 937 to 976 AD. Based in the Yangtze River Basin, Southern Tang became a center of culture, poetry, and trade. Wuyue 907 to 978 AD. Located in the lower Yangtze and coastal Zhejiang, it was known for economic prosperity and Buddhist patronage. Min, Chu, and Southern Han, smaller kingdoms in Fujian, Hunan, and Guangdong, each with strong local identities and maritime links. Former Shu, 907 to 925 AD, and later Shu, 934 to 965 AD. Based in Sichuan, known for cultural refinement but militarily weak. Life and culture during fragmentation. Despite the chaos, this was not an age of complete decline. Southern kingdoms fostered trade, especially maritime commerce with Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. Buddhism flourished in many regions, while Confucian scholars continued to preserve administrative traditions. Poetry, painting, and ceramics thrived, with Southern Tang and Wuyue producing renowned works. However, the political disunity left China vulnerable to external pressures. The Khitan Liao Empire dominated the northern frontier, and nomadic incursions were frequent. The cession of the 16 prefectures to the Liao under later Jin weakened China's defensive lines and became a lingering issue for future dynasties. The road to reunification. The later Zhou dynasty, though short-lived, began a process of stabilization under Emperor Shizong. His general, Zhao Kuangyin, would eventually seize power in a bloodless coup known as the Qin Bridge Incident in 960 AD, founding the Song dynasty. This ushered in a new era of relative unity and prosperity, but the legacy of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms persisted. Regionalism, powerful warlords, and the challenge of balancing central authority with local power. Legacy of the era. This period is often remembered as chaotic, yet it was also transformative. It accelerated the South's economic rise, fostered cultural diversity, and demonstrated both the fragility and resilience of Chinese civilization. The innovations in governance, trade, and the arts during this time laid important foundations for the Song. Thus, the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period stands as a bridge between the grandeur of the Tang and the sophistication of the Song, a century where ambition and division danced side by side, leaving a mosaic of kingdoms that each carried a fragment of the Middle Kingdom's soul. The 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period had left China divided and unstable, but out of this chaos emerged a new force that would redefine Chinese civilization, the Song dynasty. Established in 960 AD by Emperor Taizu Zhao Kuangyin, the Song marked the beginning of a period characterized not by sweeping conquests but by administrative refinement, cultural brilliance, and technological innovation. From its founding until its fall in 1279 AD, the Song dynasty steered China through a complex era of transformation that shaped the future of East Asia. The Song dynasty is often divided into 2 phases, the Northern Song 960 to 1127, and the Southern Song 1127 to 1279. During the Northern Song, the capital was established in Kaifeng, a vibrant metropolis along the Yellow River, where trade, culture, and politics flourished. After the invasion of the Jurchen-led Jin dynasty, the court retreated south to Hangzhou, beginning the Southern Song period. Despite losing control over the northern heartlands, the dynasty continued to thrive economically and culturally in the fertile Yangtze River Delta. Emperor Taizu, the founder, rose to power through the famous Qin Bridge Mutiny, where his troops acclaimed him emperor to prevent further instability. Once enthroned, he implemented a system that reduced the power of the military and elevated the role of scholar officials, creating a bureaucracy rooted in Confucian values. This civil service system, based on rigorous examinations, became the backbone of Song governance and ensured that talented men, rather than powerful aristocrats or generals, could rise to positions of authority. Under the Song, the economy experienced a remarkable boom. Agricultural productivity increased significantly due to advances in rice cultivation, particularly the introduction of fast-ripening Kampa rice from Southeast Asia. This allowed multiple harvests per year and supported a growing population that reached over 100 million people. Irrigation systems were expanded, and new techniques in farming such as improved plowing methods and widespread use of fertilizer, transformed the countryside into a highly productive engine of sustenance. Commerce and trade flourished as well. The Song dynasty oversaw one of the first truly monetized economies in the world, with widespread use of paper money, known as jiaozi, and a vibrant market system. Urban centers such as Kaifeng and later Hangzhou became bustling hubs where merchants traded goods from all corners of China and beyond. Tea, porcelain, silk, and lacquerware were exported via both land routes of the Silk Road and the growing maritime trade networks that connected China to Southeast Asia, India, and the Middle East. This economic vibrancy nurtured a thriving urban culture. The streets of Song cities were lined with tea houses, restaurants, theaters, and shops. Entertainment flourished, from shadow puppetry and storytelling to the rise of popular literature. Markets operated during the day and night, illuminated by oil lamps and bustling with customers, while the wealthy elite patronized gardens, art studios, and private academies. Hangzhou, during the Southern Song, was often described by travelers like Marco Polo as one of the most splendid cities in the world. One of the hallmarks of the Song dynasty was its extraordinary achievements in science and technology. It was during this period that movable type printing was perfected by Sheng, revolutionizing the spread of knowledge. The magnetic compass, already known in earlier times, became essential for navigation, fueling maritime exploration and trade. Gunpowder, which had been experimented with in Tang times, began to be used for military purposes in rudimentary bombs and rockets. Advances in shipbuilding, including the use of watertight bulkheads, improved long-distance travel. Astronomy, mathematics, and engineering also reached new heights. The famous polymath Shen Kuo compiled works on geology, magnetism, and cartography, while Su Song designed a complex astronomical clock tower that combined mechanical engineering with celestial observation. Agricultural manuals spread improved techniques across the countryside, while urban planning introduced regulated marketplaces and sophisticated water management systems. Culturally, the Song period is considered one of the golden ages of Chinese art and literature. Landscape painting reached its zenith with artists such as Fan Quan, Guoxi, and Ma Yuan, who depicted mountains, rivers, and misty valleys in a style that emphasized harmony between humanity and nature. Calligraphy flourished as an esteemed art form, while ceramics such as the famed Ru and Ding wares achieved technical and aesthetic perfection. The literati class, composed of scholar officials and cultured elites, became the dominant force in shaping artistic and intellectual trends. Confucianism experienced a revival during the Song, giving rise to Neo-Confucianism, a philosophical movement led by thinkers like Zhu Xi. This school of thought reinterpreted classical Confucian texts and incorporated metaphysical elements, providing a moral and intellectual foundation for governance and society that would influence China for centuries. Buddhism and Taoism continued to flourish, but Neo-Confucianism became the guiding ideology of the state and the examination system. Despite these achievements, the Song dynasty faced significant military challenges. Its emphasis on civil governance over military strength left it vulnerable to powerful northern neighbors. The Liao dynasty of the Khitans and later the Jin dynasty of the Jurchens extracted tribute and occupied vast northern territories. In 1127, the Jin captured the northern Song capital, Kaifeng, in an event known as the Jingkang Incident, taking the emperor and his court captive. This marked the transition to the southern Song, with a new capital at Linnan, modern Hangzhou. The southern Song period, while territorially diminished, continued to excel in trade, naval power, and cultural development. Its navy became one of the most advanced in the world, using paddle-wheel ships and gunpowder-based weaponry to defend its riverine and coastal frontiers. The southern Song also saw a flowering of commerce along the maritime Silk Road, connecting China more deeply with Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean trade networks. However, the looming threat of the Mongols under Genghis Khan and his successors ultimately proved insurmountable. After decades of conflict, the Mongol armies, led by Kublai Khan, overran the southern Song. In 1279, the last Song emperor, a child named Zhao Bing, was said to have drowned during the Battle of Yamen, ending the dynasty and ushering in the Yuan dynasty under Mongol rule. The legacy of the Song dynasty, however, was profound and enduring. It had transformed China into a sophisticated, economically dynamic, and culturally rich civilization. Its innovations in technology, commerce, and governance laid the groundwork for the later Ming and Qing dynasties. The Song era also left an indelible mark on East Asian history, influencing Korea, Japan, and Vietnam in art, philosophy, and administration. The Song dynasty's story is one of contrasts. Immense creativity paired with military weakness, economic prosperity alongside territorial loss, and cultural brilliance flourishing amid political instability. Yet it remains one of the most admired periods in Chinese history, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of its people. The rise of the Yuan dynasty marked one of the most dramatic and transformative periods in Chinese history. It was a time when the vast Mongol Empire, founded by Genghis Khan, stretched across Eurasia, connecting the east to the west in ways never before imagined. The Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368, was established by Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, and it represented the first time in history that the entirety of China was ruled by a non-Han dynasty. This era was defined by conquest, adaptation, cultural fusion, and far-reaching trade networks that reshaped the region and the world. The origins of the Yuan lie in the ferocious expansion of the Mongols during the 13th century. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongol army swept across the steppes, conquering vast territories from Central Asia to Eastern Europe. His successors continued the expansion, and by the time Kublai Khan ascended to power, the Mongols already controlled northern China under the Jin and western Xia territories. Kublai's ambition was to unify all of China under his rule, and in 1271 he declared the founding of the Yuan dynasty, adopting a Chinese-style dynastic title to legitimize his reign. The conquest of the southern Song dynasty was long and brutal. The Mongols faced fierce resistance from the Song armies, who were skilled in naval warfare and fortified their cities with advanced defenses. Battles raged for years, culminating in the fall of the Song capital Linnan, modern Hangzhou, in 1276. By 1279, the last remnants of Song resistance collapsed at the Battle of Yamen, where loyalist forces made a desperate stand at sea. With this victory, the Mongols finally achieved full control over China, marking the start of a new imperial era. Under the Yuan, the political structure of China changed significantly. Kublai Khan moved the capital to Dadu, modern Beijing, establishing it as the political and cultural heart of the empire. He embraced aspects of Chinese governance, retaining many traditional administrative practices and Confucian institutions while placing Mongols and other non-Han peoples in key positions of power. This created a rigid social hierarchy where Mongols occupied the highest status, followed by Central Asians, Northern Chinese and finally the Southern Chinese, who bore the brunt of discrimination. Despite this social divide, the Yuan dynasty brought about an unprecedented era of connectivity. The Pax Mongolica ensured relatively safe passage across the vast Mongol domains, allowing trade, communication and cultural exchange to flourish. The famous Venetian traveler Marco Polo arrived at Kublai Khan's court in the late 13th century and later wrote about the splendor of Yuan China, marveling at its wealth, organization and bustling cities. The Silk Road reached its peak during this period, linking China with Persia, the Middle East and Europe, and fostering the exchange of goods such as silk, porcelain, paper and gunpowder. Economically, the Yuan dynasty faced both great achievements and deep challenges. Kublai Khan introduced paper currency on a large scale and reformed the taxation system to improve revenue collection. Massive infrastructure projects, including the extension of the Grand Canal to Beijing, facilitated the transport of grain and goods between the north and south. Agricultural production initially flourished, but heavy taxation, mismanagement, and natural disasters such as floods and famines in the later period weakened the rural economy. Culturally, the Yuan period was marked by a fusion of Mongol, Chinese, Persian, and Central Asian traditions. Tibetan Buddhism gained significant influence at the court, and many Mongol rulers patronized Buddhist monks and lamas. Meanwhile, Chinese art, theater, and literature adapted to the new era, with Yuan drama, zaju, flourishing as a major form of cultural expression. Great works of painting and calligraphy also continued, often blending traditional Chinese themes with foreign motifs. However, the Yuan dynasty also faced deep-seated resentment among the Chinese population. The harsh treatment of southern Chinese, combined with heavy taxes and corvée labor requirements, fueled widespread discontent. Rebellions and uprisings became increasingly common in the 14th century, especially as the dynasty struggled with internal corruption, factional disputes, and the growing burden of military campaigns. One of the most devastating events of the later Yuan period was the outbreak of the Black Death in the 1330s and 1340s. The pandemic, which spread along the very trade routes that the Mongols had promoted, killed millions across Eurasia, severely impacting both the economy and population of China. This, combined with worsening climate conditions during the Little Ice Age, led to agricultural failures, famine, and further social unrest. The Red Turban Rebellion, which began in the 1350s, marked the beginning of the end for the Yuan dynasty. This peasant-based movement, inspired by Buddhist and millenarian beliefs, spread rapidly across China. Among its leaders was Zhu Yuanzhang, a former monk and rebel commander who would eventually overthrow the Yuan and establish the Ming dynasty in 1368. Kublai Khan himself, despite being a foreign ruler, is often remembered for his pragmatic policies and vision of a multi-ethnic empire. His successors, however, failed to maintain his legacy. As Mongol influence weakened, many Mongols retreated back to the steppes, forming the northern Yuan, while the new Ming rulers restored Chinese control over the heartland. The Yuan dynasty's legacy is complex. On one hand, it was a period of immense suffering for many, marked by warfare, exploitation, and disease. On the other, it was a time of unprecedented global interaction, where East met West on a scale never before seen. The Yuan era left behind remarkable achievements in infrastructure, trade, and culture, and it laid the groundwork for China's later engagement with the wider world. In retrospect, the Yuan dynasty stands as a testament to the power and fragility of conquest empires. It showed how a nomadic people from the steppes could rise to rule one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth, and how their reign, though brief in the grand timeline of Chinese history, reshaped the course of Asia and beyond.